Hello, everybody. This is your content and community manager, Harper, speaking before our conversation really kicks off. This is a great one because it's a topic that you don't always get to hear all the details about, which is sound and music and how it fits together with level design. Today, we're talking to two amazing people, which are Peter McConnell, our composer, who's worked with Tim on all sorts of games and has credits all over the place. And then we also have our audio director, Camden Stoddard, who's just an expert at taking whatever you give him and twisting it and tweaking it into the perfect arrangement. Together, they're going to talk about the general process of art and music and sound, but also a particular situation we had, which was one level, which started off in a very different place from where it ended, which was Ford's Follicles. It started off with a very different sound, and we needed to change it, but there was a problem, which was we couldn't re-record most of the music. So how do you do that? How do you make a level's sound really twist and turn and fit into the pieces you need when some of those pieces are sort of things you can't really change? Well, we're about to find out. Peter's smiling. I'm smiling on the inside. Please enjoy this conversation and have a good day. If I can pass the buck on to you for a bit, you came into this conversation with some very specific ideas of what we would like to approach and kind of the things that you personally wanted to talk to Peter about. So I was wondering if you could kind of dive right into that conversation and let's see where the winds take us.
Sure. Music and sound is very broad in games in general, so I am going to try and narrow it down a little bit, but I particularly wanted to focus on a couple things that happened during this production, because this production was particularly challenging. Especially around music, there are several genres going on in this game, and the breadth of the musical direction, the styles, the recording, just technical aspect. I mean, it was kind of gargantuan. And we ran up against several things, which Peter, I'm sure you can talk about a few things. There were a couple tracks in particular that I thought were really interesting because we ran into things where, as happens a lot in game development, but particularly in this one, the game is very narrative driven, so therefore music is especially married to what's happening with the characters and with the stories. And Peter has always had, just almost a supernatural touch of bringing music and helping it enhance the story, and is a very good partner with Tim Schafer's brain, which is also a huge talent that's amazing in itself. But what happened a couple times in this game is we would talk about certain things that would happen with a character or with a situation. Peter would compose for it. We would talk about the composition. We would talk about how it was going to be implemented into the game and how it was going to behave. And we would record it. And another aspect, another level that was going on is a lot of this music was recorded with the symphony, which in itself was a huge challenge during a pandemic. It was very hard to record multiple people in one room. In fact, we couldn't do that. So we had to figure out a solution, which we can touch upon. But what happened was, during one particular situation, the design that happened in the game that we recorded music for changed completely. So all of a sudden we had music that did not fit that mood at all. And I'm particularly talking around Ford Barber, the level where basically Raz finds out some dark aspects that have happened in Ford's life, and there's a lot of exposition around the story that you find out why things are happening the way they were. And originally when it started, when we were first looking at it, it wasn't really kind of like that. It was more platformer, it was more action paced. Peter, you can talk about what we originally envisioned for the music and that we did record for it, but we wound up having to use that music somewhere else, and which left this big, dark, super important part of the game with no music. And we couldn't record. We couldn't go back to the symphony again, like we had already moved on. So it was quite an interesting challenge. So maybe, Peter, maybe you can speak to how you met that challenge. I was very impressed.
What we had originally for Fort Barber was, it was described to me as a barbershop, sort of classic, in little neighborhood barbershop with the pole and everything, so I did some music that was sort of sort of whimsical barbershop music that had a little quote of the Barber Seville in it, and because you have to, because it's Bugs Bunny reference, we have to always pay homage to our ancestors. But so it's this sort of a little romp. Then the level design changed completely and became this sort of dark, brooding, sort of city of nightmares, sort of with these dark streets and street lights, and just sort of, you just think you're going to get mugged everywhere you look, and it's very fantastical. You're going to, when you get mugged, it's going to be by some huge creature or something. So it obviously, happy barber music was not going to work there. And we also were dealing with, we only have so many resources that we can apply to music in the game. So doing a brand new piece of music just wasn't in the cards. And so what I did was create this kind of nightmare version of the music by taking it and slowing it down and turning it backwards, actually taking the audio and playing it backwards, and then creating a new themes based on the backwards version of the Maligulus theme. But most of the track was literally taken from other music in the game, mostly this barber piece, and some Ford Graveyard music, and just turning it around and just turning it on its head and making it warped and frightening.
We had a lot of discussion about what Raz was facing, the fact that he was finding out all this stuff about the history of Ford, because you kind of learn about how his mind was fractured and why. And I remember particularly talking to you about, we delved into the Beatles one night, and we were talking about the experiments they did on the White Album and how they started reversing orchestra and stuff, and
right.
And then you sent me, I think you sent me a couple edits, but I remember the first edit you sent me, I was like, oh man, it was eerie. It was just super eerie, and we wound up using it quite a bit in that level. I mean, there are definitely sound effects driven stuff, but the music's definitely playing in there a lot, because it's just this vibe. It was just perfect. So I was really happy about that, because, when we realized oh man, we recorded stuff that does not fit at all. And I think the stuff we did record is actually in the barbershop in the headquarters, but it's playing over a radio, which is such a game dev thing to have happen. And I think we do use it in other places, but
that's right. Yeah, we do. I think
I was we recorded an entire orchestra only to have it play through this radio speaker. So it was just, the audio engineer me was oh, but it does come up, and it's in its full glory. in other places. So I was happy about that. But it was a classic example of just meeting some challenges, some music and audio challenges under pressure, and what were we going to do, because oh man, the feeling you get when you've already recorded with a symphony and you're like, oh yeah, this isn't going to work. That's fun.
Right. Yeah. The tracks are there. And what's remarkable is how sort of elastic music can be, how you can take very happy music, and if you play it backwards in the right situation, it sounds quite ominous. It's kind of like I heard a preacher once say that evil is to live backwards, right? So the music can be that way. You can take this really sort of happy, even rhapsodic music, and when you play it backwards, it so fundamentally messes with your perception that it really makes it seem sort of demonic. It makes it seem, wrong. Yeah. And we're also able to find some ways to weave some themes in there, and as I mentioned earlier, and that helps too.
I loved how well it paired with what was going on thematically. It was perfect, and I wish we had done it before. So it worked out well. And the other thing I wanted to mention, Peter, you can go off on this, because you have a stronger relationship with the MSO. The Melbourne Symphony Orchestra was this wonderful orchestra that we used for this, and we ran into some really interesting times, because it got to a point with COVID-19, like you could not have that many people in a room together. Like they had laws about it, and so we wound up recording in this way that actually became useful later. But maybe you can expand on that.
Yeah, originally, so they were very careful about the lockdowns in Australia at that time, and the Melbourne Symphony was quite scrupulous in following those rules, and what we had was essentially a 68, I think, piece orchestra, pretty medium large orchestra, and the initial 64 maybe. Anyway, the initial rule was in the neighborhood of you couldn't have more than 20 on a stage to follow the protocols of social distancing. And so that was going to mean 3 passes for every single piece. And we actually sort of did all this work to plan how the music got composed and the audio routing and the mock-ups. This is kind of geek stuff, but folks who've done this out there will understand. It was all set up for 3 sections, and then we got about midway through the summer. We got because the recordings were in December, I think, of 21. We got I'm sorry, of 20, right? Last year was 21.
December 20.
Sorry, just to say, the time just flies by. So we got the news that, we could actually get 30 on the stage, and we were able to record in 2 sessions with some people in a separate isolation booth. And so that was a little more, that was easier to deal with. And what we ended up doing, of course, we had to do all the rerouting again to deal with that, because everything was planned on 20 on a stage, and then we had to sort of change things around for 30 on a stage. But what was great is we got brass and winds in one group, and we had brass and percussion in one group, strings and winds in the other. And this turned out to be, even though it was something that was forced upon us, it was actually a blessing in disguise, because it made the mixing process much easier for our mixer, Will Storkson. Because the separation we were able to get with the instruments was much clearer, and also we were able to get clean takes of separately for the brass and winds versus the strings. And but there was also this really cool effect that it had on the game programming for the game itself, which I'm sure Camden can say more about, which is essentially now you have, for every piece of music, you have separate tracks for winds and strings and brass and percussion. That is an opportunity to apply them differently based on the drama. So if things get more exciting, you wait until things get super exciting to bring in the brass and percussion. Maybe Camden, you can say more about that.
Yeah, what happened is essentially we had a stems mixing bass for orchestra, which is not usually the case. When you record orchestra, you're usually recording the orchestra together in one room, and you're getting this fantastic sound. It's usually a large room, and but orchestra is very dynamic. It's supposed to be recorded that way. And in general, there are ways that you can kind of separate stuff, but you don't normally do it this way. So usually when we're implementing music into a game, you have the orchestral track, and that's about it. And you just kind of have to either do a straight edit job, which is not recommended. It's hard to do that with the orchestra, or you just apply it at the right time, and it's a grand piece, and you find your moments. But with this was very unique, or at least I had not experienced it in our games as such. But because you had these instruments separated out, it meant that if there were different tension levels or game states happening, you could introduce new instrumentation or take it out, which was really nice, because that's usually saved for either computer music or something where you can isolate easily, like a rock band or something like that. But with orchestra, that's not normal. You don't normally do that. Usually you're just doing full blast, and it's the whole thing, and that's what you got. Unless you're like, I don't know, doing a very, very high production thing, and you can afford a studio where you can actually figure that out and separate, but it's unusual. So it gave us a lot of really, really cool opportunities, which was fun, and we use them a lot, especially in Maligula, I believe. We do like, varied instrumentation layers as things get more and more intense or less, and you're able to create this real dynamic feel against the story. So it works very well. I think we should do that from now on.
If we possibly can afford it, yeah.
Yeah. And plus the MSO is just amazing.
They're so fantastic to work with.
World-class players.
Yeah, I was just editing tracks for Volume 3, the soundtrack recently, and I was just marveling. I was just, wow, I forgot how great these performances were. I mean, they're really, really fantastic.
Yeah.
And that's inspiring to work with. And there's another aspect of working with games, developing for a game, and that is, as you're going along, as you've heard from sort of the switches we had to make, the sort of improvising we had to do, the game changes as you're making it, and so you have to kind of be ready to move with that.
Yep.
And one of the most unpredictable, least predictable things about the process with this game was cutscenes, cinematics, where you don't know, you get to see the script, you get to see what are called animatics, which are very sort of blocky cartoons of what the cutscene is going to be like, and you may have to just work with that because you've got an orchestra date scheduled and it's time, and the cutscene isn't done, so you just have to write the music and record it. And so having this sort of flexible way, the sort of layered way of recording that we did these tracks with, gave us a lot of sort of ammunition later on when we had, oh my goodness, I didn't know that scene was that long, or the scene's not quite as dramatic or more dramatic than I thought it would be. And so, that can affect which layers you might put in. So it was that we had to really kind of think. It's kind of weird to say think fast, because working during COVID was kind of I think a sluggish process for everybody. But we did have to kind of think on our feet as the sort of project was changing, so that we could match what was going on with the game.
Yeah. Is that I was going to ask, for my own curiosity, is that a process that ultimately becomes really fulfilling, in the sense that because things aren't so concrete, there are potentially gaps for you to fill out? Or do you ever reach the point where you go, well, I made this thing and it turns out that it's gone off in a completely different direction in terms of cutscene design or
or visuals or tone or mood, and if so, how do you adjust to that?
I mean, that's constant. That's the thing that I really want fans to know about composers like Peter. Peter's got a lot of experience with it, and has kind of, seen games grow up around this. But composing for games, as opposed to like composing for movies or television or something, games is kind of a whole different animal. Because,
yeah, of course.
in general, like, with movies, you tend to have a post-lock, you tend to have a beginning, a middle, and end. Like, it's not easy per se, but at least like it's a lot more locked down. With games, it's kind of a different thing, because a lot of times, and I've seen Peter do this, he has to adjust as everybody else is adjusting. Right? It's not something that he's not going to get the game finished and then go through and compose to it. Like, he is working on ideas while the animators and the artists are working on ideas, while the designers and the writers are working on ideas. So things are just constantly changing. And I had to work with Peter all the time. I'm constantly sending him visuals. I'm showing him the build. I'm showing him the script. Like, it's the only thing he can do. And this is very hard because he is not in the company. He's off-site. He's away from like all the current changes all the time. So he is trying to picture the narrative feel and like super delicate character dynamics representing music while he can't see what's happening. So like, it's super important for him to get a really good overview as best he can and then sculpt around it. Like, it's a very, very huge challenge. And I have a lot of respect for composers who can do that, because, I mean, as a sound designer, I can barely do that. With music, that's a whole other level.
You do perfectly fine, Camden.
Thanks.
Don't sell yourself short. As a heads up, we are reaching our 10-minute mark out of respect for everybody's time,
Sure.
as a matter of fact. So I not to dominate the conversation too much, in this case, but I want to ask, since we're talking about Ford, we're talking about just for the processes in general, how do we look at on both your sides returning to Psychonauts after so many years, after such a shift of public opinion? Which is to say that obviously it had fans, but when I talk to our fans nowadays, I have people I talk to who are Tim's age, who love games forever, and then I have fans who are 14 years old, 15 years old, who are identifying with these characters and discovering this world for the first time. How do you craft, from an audio standpoint, a world that invites all sorts of people in? And is that as simple a matter as just keeping true to the reality of the world itself?
Peter, do you want me to go or you?
I think Psychonauts is dealing with a lot of enduring subjects. I think it resonates because what it's about is so sort of fundamentally human. Everybody has skeletons in their closet. Everybody has demons. Everybody has hang-ups. Everybody has joys and frustrations, and how we go through life and deal with our own issues. Geez, I'm starting to sound like I did live in the 1970s. What can I say? How we deal with that stuff is, it's just so fundamental, and it doesn't only the trappings, only the sort of window dressing changes, but the fundamental problems and challenges and joys that we face as people, and relating to each other and helping each other and helping ourselves, that really doesn't change. And so I think that that's why Psychonauts is just as interesting to. I actually happen to have a 14-year-old, and he just loves the game.
Yeah.
And I think that and I think he really appreciates that there's a certain amount of depth to it, that it's funny and it's clever and it's fun to jump around in, but there's also things being said that matter, and that always gives a piece of art, I think, a little extra heft, a little extra staying power. So I think that's maybe why I'm hoping that it seems to be a very popular game, actually. So I think
it's doing okay. It's doing okay for itself right now. People really like it, so there you go.
Good.
I wanted to ask one more question, which is a bit more esoteric, but I suppose this applies to Camden as well, which is, were there ever musical genres, musical techniques, musical or in audio quirks that you wanted to incorporate into the game, which you never had the chance to do, whether that is a type of music, whether that is, wow, I really wanted it so that every time Helbet Fullbear talked, he had excessive reverb. Please don't tell me that was true. That'd be ridiculous. But, I'm always curious about this because, a thing that we don't hear a lot of studios talk about very often, we talk about process and this is how we got things done, but it's always good to know what might have been left behind or what might be germinating in your head still for maybe later. I was wondering if there's anything like that stood out in your memory at this point, or has a year been so long that it has wiped everything away from our memories?
Well, I can answer that for the composition side, and
sure.
I definitely and normally I am one of these guys who's like obsesses over, oh my gosh, if I'd only done so and so, right? And that's just the way I am in life, so yes, but I can honestly say in this case, I can't think of a single thing that I wanted to do that I didn't do.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer. That's a very good answer.
I think the only thing that came up for me in review later, Peter, was reggae. But then I thought about it. I'm like, well, there's calypso.
Yeah, the calypso.
Yeah.
Actually, it's actually ska.
Yeah.
In the sailing music. Yeah. No. I mean, certainly genre-wise, I think that sort of relates to another point that was brought up earlier too, which was has to do with unpredictability, the unpredictability of the process.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really one of the funnest things about it. It's like it's even true in a recording session. You go into a recording session, you may have every single note written on paper, but there's going to be a surprise.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes it's not a pleasant surprise, but those are pretty rare, honestly. What I find is that most of the time the surprise is like, whoa, okay, that's cool. Okay, let's keep that.
Yeah, and I think sound-wise, I'm very happy with it. The senior sound designer on that project was Paul O'Rourke, and I kind of tasked him with owning the aesthetic of the sound of the game, and he just delivered. I mean, it's amazing work. And going through, there's certainly things where I was like, oh yeah, we were tinkering around with this concept and it never made it in, but nothing super major where I'm like, oh man, they're really gonna miss out on that. Like there's just so much stuff, and we got to really, really experiment. The main concern I had, like, I wasn't worried ever about Psychonauts appealing to anybody because the kernel of narrative in that is just so strong. It's so universal. I mean, Psychonauts can be anything, really. It's just whatever is in your mind. So like, that's just open. It just opens the gates to anything you want. And the main concern I had was just being, for the audio team, being a good steward of the original, like making sure that feel was brought into this one, but also like expanded upon. And I think we did. And I know the music absolutely did. Peter absolutely did a fantastic job. I think the audio team did a very solid job. When I'm playing in that world, like, it feels great. So I'm pretty happy about it. It's rare when I look back on a game, I'm like, oh, I'm happy with that. Like, it's It's not often. I'm like, oh, that one thing I should have gotten in. But with this one, and it could be because there was just so much stuff.
Yes.
You know,
Psychonauts 2, I'm pretty happy with it. Colon. That's pretty rare. That's pretty rare.
Yeah. I remember I had a boss who would always go, I almost didn't hate that. Like, that's how he would put it. But with me, I'm more like, oh, no, this is fun. Like, I look back on it, I'm like, okay, I get what we were doing, and we did it.
That's the way you're sailing. It's just like sailing. It's feeling good. You're making jazz. Many different metaphors that I'm not pulling out of my head right now. It's good. It's all very good. The fans have responded well.
Yeah.
I think obviously the level design and obviously people gravitate towards campers, but then also being in those worlds, just hearing those spaces. I speak for one, and I must say before the chance eludes me is I listen to that Questionable Area track all the time, Peter.
It's my son's favorite too. That's awesome.
Yeah. just absolutely all the time, where I just go like, you know, because obviously I do stuff for the studio, but I'm a writer in my spare time, so I love listening to music as I write, and I go like, oh, this is this is perfect. It's so good. It's very, very nice.
Well, that was a huge opportunity because I was going all way back to my 14-year-old self playing John Denver songs.
Yeah, jam band it up and everything. Wow. Yeah.
Nice.
And and I also got to play the 5-string banjo. That's a very special instrument that I have. I don't get to play that much. So that 5-string banjo part, and then I think the real sort of and Melbourne Symphony has tracks in there, and then my friend Paul Hansen, who recently played on John Batiste's album. He's a electric bassoonist.
All right.
And he is just fantastic. I remember I was like, when we was doing that stuff, I was like, dude, did you hit a high F? Was that a high F? He's like, yeah, it was a high F.
He's like, don't worry about it.
No big deal. No big deal.
It's just so musical and such a unique sound. And it sounds like a saxophone. Or something. You're not sure what it is, but that's actually a bassoon doing all that weird stuff.
Yeah, that whole the whole section with the chase around the Electopus with like kind of the spine track
so
on
good.
it. It's so great. I loved it.
And then I suppose the final big question for Psychonauts 2 is, far be it from me to presume to understand the intricacies of your professions by any stretch of the imagination, but obviously it feels like you enter into a game sometimes with a very preconceived notion of what a game is going to be. This is your fantasy game. This is your such and such, and of course you have room to experiment around that. But I suppose the final question for today is, when you head to Psychonauts, in terms of experimentation, do you find ample opportunity to go off that beaten path, or is it something that you say, well, I already know what I want to do. You sold me, you had me at brain in a jar. Let's go for it.
For sound effects, yeah, absolutely. We were trying out all kinds of stuff, and we were getting interesting direction from Tim, like psychic energy. We were really trying to find the sound of psychic energy because he had like this specific feel in his head, and he was like, it shouldn't be too science fiction, but it also shouldn't be like like just straight up electricity and everything. So we like worked on that for months, like trying to understand that sound, and it was funny because with Psychonauts, like our sound effects tended to really feel well once they started going tonal. Yeah. And they started blurring into music and things like that, and then coming back out. So that really worked. But we I mean, on the sound effects side, we experimented a lot.
For sure.
It was really fun.
And I suppose let's close it out on your end, Peter. Is there a lot of room to jam around, or do you say, hey, Milkman Conspiracy, we gotta go. This is what we got. this is how it's gonna be. Gosh darn, very, very Glenn Ross. This is how it is.
That's funny because Glenn Ross was a big model for Grim Fandango.
Yeah.
You know what? Yeah, for real, makes sense.
But I guess what I would say is what beaten path. I mean, there was definitely I wanted to preserve the whimsical feeling of Psychonauts 1.
Sure.
And there were themes. I'm a big theme guy. Like I spent a lot of time on melodies, and Camden will tell you we did a whole little period of time where all we were doing was coming up with melodies. So I wanted to make sure that I preserved the themes we already had, and then had good themes for the new characters. But beyond that, beyond actual just the lines that you whistle for the parts, it was just I just considered it to be open season, because it's such a wild world, and it's as infinite as the human mind. So I felt like the music needed to have that kind of flexibility too. So I was just in anything. It's like, oh well, we're out in the quarry. Let's I'm thinking about the Grand Canyon Suite a little bit. Now we're in a waterfall. That's a different thing. We're sneaking along catacombs. It's a whole and every game has a zillion different environments, right?
Mm-hmm.
But not like this. I mean, they're just so different that the whole helmet level, the whole world of the senses and the psychedelic. I mean, that was very near and dear to my heart because I played in jam bands and I grew up listening to 60s music.
Amazing where you went musically. Yeah.
Oh, Hollis was, that was, and that's another part of my college experience is just loving jazz. So yeah, I mean, it was just wherever the game was leading me, that's where I went.
All right. One word answer from both of you. This is how I pull out the old interview credentials. We'll start with Camden. Camden, what color is the sky in your world?
Oh, it's definitely scarlet.
That's more than one word, but that's fine. That's acceptable. It's definitely scarlet's fine. And then Peter, in the world inside your mind, what color is the sky in there for you?
Well, it's purple quite often, and it's green quite often. It's kind of psychedelic, to be honest with you.
Tie-dyed.
Psychedelic would be the one word, I think.
That's perfect. Thank you all so much. This is perfect. So I'm going to let y'all go. It is 2 o'clock here, which means I'm going to go on a walk. Please go get some breakfast if it's that. I don't know what time breakfast is anymore. Please hydrate. Enjoy your day. Camden, this was wonderful. Peter, genuine delight. I've told you before. The story I will perpetually tell you is I saw you at the wrap party and avoided you out of intimidation.